let's just jump right in. I want you to think about a single word: sales. What's the very first thing that pops into your head? For most of us, it's not great, right? It's this feeling of being pushed, maybe even manipulated. But what if I told you that you and me and pretty much everyone we know, we're all in sales now? Not in that old, grimy way, but in a way that's become absolutely critical to our jobs and our lives. Today, we're going to flip that whole idea on its head and uncover the surprising truth about what it really means to move other people.
Okay, so let's do a quick experiment. Seriously, right now. When I say the word sales, what's the first word that surfaces for you? Don't think too hard about it. What's that immediate gut-level reaction? Got it? Okay, hold on to that word.
If the word you thought of was something like pushy, slimy, annoying, or maybe just a sound like ugh, well, you're not alone, not by a long shot. When researchers asked a bunch of people this exact question, this is what they got back. This word cloud is basically a snapshot of our collective brain. You see pushy right there in the middle, but look at all its friends: dishonest, sleazy, deceitful. It's a whole vocabulary of distrust. This isn't just a minor dislike, It's this deep cultural feeling that selling is just a kind of dirty business.
And, with a reputation like that, you'd think this whole profession is on its way out, right? A relic of a bygone era. To really get why we feel this way, we have to meet someone who seems to be the last living example of that old world of sales. This is Norman Hall. For decades, he has walked up and down the incredibly steep hills of San Francisco, carrying that classic leather binder and a case full of sample brushes. He is a fuller brush man. But here's the thing, he's not just a fuller brush man, he's the last one in the entire city. He is, for all intents and purposes, the last salesman of his kind.
And you have to understand, the Fuller Brush Man wasn't just some guy selling stuff. He was a cultural icon. The company started way back in 1903 and just exploded. At their peak, in 1948, their army of 8,300 salesmen made 50 million house calls in a single year. Think about that for a second. That's more calls than there were households in the entire United States back then. They were in Disney cartoons. Hollywood made movies about them. It was a totally respectable mainstream job. But then, well, the world changed. Supermarkets popped up, more women joined the workforce, and new tech just made door-to-door selling feel ancient. The fall was fast, and the company filed for bankruptcy in 2012. It really looked like the world just didn't need guys like Norman Hall anymore.
And Norman himself will tell you the same thing. He remembers a time when dozens of other salesmen walked these same streets. Now, it's just him. He knows that when he's done, nobody's taking his place. His story, and the story of the encyclopedia salesman, it all seems to paint this really clear picture. The age of the salesperson is over. Or is it?
Well, this is where the story takes a massive turn, because it turns out the reports of the death of the salesman were greatly exaggerated. In fact, if you look at the modern economy, you don't find a funeral for selling, you find a birth announcement.
So get this, despite everything we might think, sales is still a huge part of our economy. If you dig into the US labor data, you find this staggering fact: 1 out of every 9 American workers is still in traditional sales. That's more than 15 million people whose job is literally to sell stuff. And this isn't some dying field. That number has been rock solid for years. It survived recessions, it survived the internet. In fact, America has more salespeople than it has factory workers. It has a sales force 5 times bigger than the entire federal government. So this isn't some fringe activity. It's a pillar of our economy.
Okay, that number is pretty wild on its own, but it leads to an even bigger and frankly more important question. If 1 in 9 of us is in traditional sales, what in the world are the other 8 of us doing?
And that brings us to this core idea: non-sales selling. Just think about your own work week. Have you ever had to, say, persuade your boss to give your project a little more budget? Or convince that skeptical coworker to try a new process? Or even just pitch an idea in a meeting? All of those things are acts of moving others. You're trying to convince someone to give up a resource, their time, their attention, their support, in exchange for what you're offering. No cash changes hands, but it's absolutely a transaction. It's the art of persuasion in a world where we all need to influence people to get things done. So, how much of our day is actually spent doing this? Well, a really groundbreaking survey asked thousands of workers that exact question, and the answer was a total bombshell. People estimate they spend about 40% of their time at work doing this non-sales selling. Just let that sink in for a second. 40%. That's 24 minutes of every single hour. It's basically 2 full days of a 5-day work week spent persuading, negotiating, and influencing.
And it's not just about the hours we're putting in. The same survey asked people how critical these moving activities are to their actual success at work, and the results were even more revealing. You can see here, people rated the importance of moving others as way higher than the already huge amount of time they spend on it. The key thing to see here is that gap. We instinctively know that our ability to do this well is absolutely essential for our careers, maybe even more than we consciously realize.
So, that raises a huge question. How did this happen? How did we all end up in the moving business without even getting the memo? Well, this massive shift in how we work didn't happen by accident. It was pushed along by three incredibly powerful forces in our economy and our society. And those three forces are entrepreneurship, elasticity, and ed-med. Each one of these trends has completely reshaped the world of work and has kind of quietly turned all of us into movers. Let's break down exactly how.
First up, the explosion of entrepreneurship. We all thought technology would make salespeople obsolete, right? But instead, it's made more of us into sellers. Platforms like Etsy, Kickstarter, eBay, they make it insanely easy to start a business from your kitchen table. The result? More than 21 million non-employer businesses in the US alone. That's just a fancy way of saying a one-person show. But when you're a graphic designer or a consultant or a personal trainer, you don't have a sales department. You are the sales department. You're constantly selling your vision, negotiating with suppliers, and convincing customers your idea is worth it.
The second force is something called elasticity. Even if you work for a big company, your job probably isn't what it used to be. The days of having a super rigid, narrow job description are pretty much over. Today's world is just too unpredictable, so companies now value employees with elastic skills, the ability to stretch beyond your main role and help out in different ways. A software engineer has to pitch a new feature. An accountant needs to persuade managers to stick to the budget. We all have to be more versatile, and that versatility almost always involves moving others.
And this quote from the CEO of Atlassian, a huge software company, just nails it. They have zero traditional salespeople. Zero. Their whole philosophy is that everyone who talks to a customer is, in a way, a salesperson. An engineer's job isn't just to write code, it's to understand the customer's problems so well that the product practically sells itself. In this kind of company, selling isn't a department, it's a skill everyone needs to have.
And that brings us to the third and maybe the biggest force of all, the rise of the ed-med sector. If you look at this chart of jobs in the US, you see a lot of industries that are flat or even declining. But there's one line that's just shooting for the moon: education and health services. This is now the largest and the fastest growing part of the entire US economy.
So why does that matter so much? Because the very soul of these jobs is non-sales selling. What does a teacher do? They move students from a place of not knowing to a place of understanding. What does a doctor do? They have to move a patient to change their diet or take their medicine. A therapist has to convince you to do the hard work now for a healthier future. All of these professions are, at their core, in the business of moving people. Okay, so the evidence is overwhelming. We're all in the moving business. But this new world doesn't just change who is doing the selling. The really big deal is that it completely changes how we have to do it. All those old, pushy, slimy words from the beginning, that stuff isn't just unpleasant anymore. It's completely useless. And that's all because the balance of power has fundamentally flipped. For pretty much all of history, business ran on something called information asymmetry. It just means the seller knew more than the buyer. The classic example is the used car salesman. He knew the car was a total lemon, but you didn't. That information gap gave him all the power. But today? Today we live in a world of information parity. Before you even step on the car lot, you can look up the car's entire history, read 100 reviews, and compare prices from 5 other dealers, all on your phone. That information advantage is gone. Poof. The buyer now has just as much info, a ton of choices, and a very loud megaphone to talk back. This power shift has created a brand new golden rule. The old rule was caveat emptor, which is Latin for buyer beware. It was your job, as the buyer, not to get ripped off. But in our new world of information parity, the rule has flipped. Now it's caveat venditor, seller beware. Because now, if you're dishonest or if you provide a terrible service, your customer can tell the entire world with a 1-star review or a viral tweet. In this world, honesty and transparency aren't just nice ideals. They are literally the only winning strategy. So if the old pushy way of doing things is dead, what replaces it? Well, you might have heard the old sales mantra, ABC, always be closing. It was aggressive, it was all about the seller. The new world requires a new set of ABCs. The new A is for attunement. This is about getting out of your own head and actually seeing the world from someone else's perspective. The B is for buoyancy. Let's be real. Trying to move people means you're going to face a sea of rejection. Buoyancy is how you stay afloat. And finally, C is for clarity. The world is drowning in information. The most valuable thing you can do now is help people make sense of it all, to find the real problems and show them a clear path forward.
So, here's the bottom line. Whether you like it or not, whether it's in your job title or not, you are in the moving business. You spend a huge chunk of your life persuading and influencing the people around you. The world has changed, the rules have flipped, and the skills you need are no longer about being a shark, they're about being human. So now that you know, there's really only one question left. How are you going to get better at it?